Ronald DePinho, luso-americano, é hoje presidente do MD Anderson Cancer Center, a referência quando se fala de tratamento ou investigação de cancro. Nesta instituição trabalham mais de 20 mil pessoas, entre elas muitos investigadores que tentam acabar com este flagelo que afeta transversalmente todas as sociedades. Olá e sejam bem-vindos a mais uma edição do America Connection. Hoje estamos em Houston, no Texas, e o nosso convidado é Ronald DePinho, presidente do maior centro de pesquisa e tratamento do cancro. Dr. DePinho, thank you very much for having us here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's start this interview speaking about your father, Álvaro DePinho. He was born in Portugal and he came to America as a stowaway, spending 13 days in a cargo container.
Oh, you've done your homework. So first of all, I'm very proud, obviously, to be an American, but even more proud to be Portuguese. I take great pride in the heritage that I have and the great country that my ancestors came from. And my father is a great example of somebody who had the will to survive, to use his ingenuity to do something for his family and give back to society. At the age of 17, in the wake of a very, very difficult situation where many days there wasn't food to eat, the family sent him to Rio de Janeiro to try to make some money to support the family.
And how was that experience there?
Well, by the time he was 21, he had half a restaurant, drove a taxi, and had an ice business. So he was very entrepreneurial and worked very, very hard to try to support the family. He realized, however, that he wasn't able to make enough money and the family really needed his support, and learned that America was a land of opportunity.
So you went back to Portugal?
No, well, actually, what he did from there was to go from Rio to New York, but did so as a stowaway in a ship in a box for 13 days and almost succumbed as a result of that experience. And from there, he entered into the United States and worked as a laborer in construction and learned the construction industry.
And started a company, right?
That's right. But before that, he actually, when World War II broke out, he immediately enlisted because he loved this country. He loved what this country stood for, and he wanted to help it. And so he enlisted. He fought on the front lines on the Amalfi Coast, was one of the few from his company to return alive, came back to the United States.
And got his citizenship through that
Exactly,
that
exactly. And as a result, he then started a life, and he started a construction company, worked in Connecticut, had apartment buildings and so on. He was a remarkable human being, and because of his deep religious beliefs, when he did do well in life, he devoted his life to helping other people, bringing others in need to this country and supporting them and helping them get on the feet, because he never forgot what it was like to grow up hungry.
What did you learn from your father? Once you said that he had a fourth grade education and a doctorate in hard work. Was that the motif in your life?
I admired him to no end. He was an individual, let's put it this way. Aristotle defined genius as uncommon common sense. My father had great common sense and had great feel for people. He taught me from the very beginning that to be understood, you must first understand other folks. To get respect, you have to give it, and always be true to yourself. And so many lessons throughout life were ones that I received from my father, and I carry them to this day as president of MD Anderson.
And he believed in education, right? Because when you were in the Bronx, in New York City, your father always wanted to send you to Fordham University, and eventually you went there, right?
Well, interestingly enough, my father, his first apartment in Bronx was in a basement, and every day he would see the young men at that time in their white shirts and ties going to school, and he would tell his roommate, you know, someday my children are going to go to this university.
He envisioned that for you.
Exactly, and he actually told me that story the night that I graduated when I had to give a speech to my class.
Oh, so you didn't know that before?
My father was a very quiet and humble man. He never really talked about himself. He simply devoted his life to other people. He was a remarkable human being.
And then you major in biology and minor in art history. The link between science and arts is creativity?
Well, I would say that it's always been an intimate relationship. The science of art is one that has been before us for centuries now. You think about architecture, you think about sculpture, but also understanding science requires a human element as well. That is, that we're not just dealing with molecules and genes and DNA. We're talking about things that operate on a more holistic level as well. You know, what is emotion? What is thought and cognition? These are things that are also fundamental to science, but they have to be viewed not just through the lens of science, but through the lens of art.
So that's why you decided to study also art history.
I loved both art and history as well as science.
After you finished your medical degree, you started your postdoctoral program and eventually took you to the position of director of the Harvard Cancer Center. My question is trying to know how much of this was pre-planned?
Well, I was not director of the Harvard Cancer Center, but I was director of the Belfer Institute, which is one specific part of Dana-Farber at Harvard Medical School, which I'm extremely proud. I would have to say that throughout my life I worked very, very hard, but I was also extremely fortunate to be surrounded by people that were much smarter, much more creative than I was, and my job was to enable them to do great things. And so one of the things that I do well is to help others achieve their greatness and organize efforts in a way that helps solve big problems. And so in science, in medicine, you have to have some luck. That is to make those discoveries, to notice them, and that doesn't come to everyone, but you have to seize the opportunity and work hard once they do emerge.
Did you have that luck?
I had. I was very, very fortunate at a number of occasions to have my laboratory and the gifted people in my laboratory and my colleagues make very important discoveries which move the field of medicine forward. And of that, I'm extremely proud to have been associated with such an amazing group.
You started as a medical student, but you ended up in a lab. Do you miss dealing with patients?
I continue to love clinical medicine. To me, the clinical arena is one that continues to be, you know, at the heart of my emotions in my profession. And in fact, I moved into the laboratory because I felt with my background, with my capabilities, I would best serve the patient if I could understand the fundamental underpinnings of the disease. I became interested in not simply treating one patient at a time, but trying to understand the basis for the disease. And if I could understand that, then potentially I could develop drugs, therapies, approaches that could lead to solving the problem for many patients at one time.
By the time you were at this center, there was a partnership with Portuguese universities. How that happened?
Well, Portugal, you know, is a country with a great tradition of collaboration. You look at what happened 500 years ago, how it went around the world, and it established, it was very unusual that 1 million individuals would have a great business plan to collaborate as opposed to conquer other countries.
It was a different approach.
It was a very different approach, and it was really quite revolutionary at the time. And I think that culture of collaboration continues to this day. And so I was very, very proud to see that Portugal reached out to great universities around the world, including Harvard, and to see my country collaborate with the university that I was at brought great joy to me. And so when I was asked to go to Portugal to give a lecture, I immediately accepted it.
What did you feel when you get there?
Well, first of all, I remember the last time that I was in Portugal, this is before it joined the EU, that when I flew in on the airplane, that the amount of progress that was made in Portugal was amazing. I remember as a 5-year-old driving from Lisbon, my dad's car that he brought over in the ship to Oporto, that this was a one-lane highway going each way. That was the major thoroughfare for Portugal. And now you see all of the progress that's been made, the opportunities for people. It was an inspiration to me. I also was very impressed with the quality of the science there, the drive and determination of the scientists there. And I think it's very important for Portugal to recognize that they have some very special treasures in their scientific and clinical community.
What did you feel when you were giving this speech at the first symposium?
I felt a tremendous source of pride that the son of a Portuguese immigrant could return to a nation and stand there and speak of things that could not be imagined even just 10 years ago.
What about now? Do you follow news in Portugal? Are you aware what's going on in Portugal? Do you have that?
You know, I have many cousins that always speak to me and, you know, about what's going on there. Obviously, the country is experiencing a very tough time right now economically. I think one of the things that we've learned over the century is that the Portuguese people are determined, they're honest, they're hardworking, and I think that spirit will overcome any transient economic challenges that we have. But we have to recognize that the nation is going through a very, very difficult time right now, and anything that I could do as a citizen of Portugal, I stand ready to do.
Do you think that Portugal should do the same as the US, in the sense that you keep investing more and more in science, even in these economic times?
Well, I would say, I would look at it a different way. It's not whether we can afford to do it, but whether we can afford not to do it. If you think about the challenges of healthcare, we are entering into a period where we have an aging of the world's population. By 2025, we're going to have 1.2 billion people over the age of 60. Every 5 years after the age of 60, the incidence of Alzheimer's, cancer, diabetes, and heart disease doubles. By the time you're 85, you have a 45% chance of having Alzheimer's, a 1 in 2 chance of having cancer. So our nations need to understand that if we're to solve those problems, we need the science so that we can understand how to prevent those diseases from happening, or if they do occur, to cure them immediately in a very cost-efficient manner. So the only answer is science.
What about the research done in Portugal? Are you aware of the work they are doing, for example, in Ipatimub? Is one of the finest institutes researching cancer in Portugal and even in Europe.
Well, I had an opportunity to visit as part of this delegation from Harvard a couple of years ago, and I have to say, having interacted with several dozen investigators, I was extremely impressed with the cancer program as well as the neuroscience program. This is very basic research as well as translational research that is going to have a huge impact on the cancer problem and the problems of brain health. And so Portugal should be extremely proud of the collection of investigators that it has and should find every way possible to support those investigators.
Through your research, you and your team reversed the aging in mice for the very first time. Can you explain this experiment in a way that all of us can understand, of course?
Absolutely. So what happens when we age is that we have damage that occurs on our DNA. When you reach a certain level of damage, it precipitates the aging process. So we do very well for decades, and then suddenly in our last decade of life we have a rapid decline. And the reason for that is that threshold of damage that you accumulate. So what we did in mice was to regulate, to be able to turn on and off an enzyme that could erase the damage.
Telomerase?
The telomerase enzyme. And this enzyme allows one to erase damage at the tips of the chromosomes, the ends of the DNA, where the damage accumulates as we age. So what we did was to engineer mice, genetically engineer mice, to be able to turn that gene on and off. In the off state, the animals aged very, very prematurely. They had smaller brains, poor brain functioning. They couldn't remember well. They were infertile. They also had gray hair, all sorts of problems that an aged person would have. In that state of very severe aging, we turned the gene back on. And we were expecting the animal to just not age anymore.
To stop the process.
To stop the process. What we saw instead was a dramatic reversal in the signs and symptoms of aging. So the brain increased in size, the animals became fertile again, they became more active. They basically went from somebody who was in their 80s to somebody who was in their 40s or 50s. So it was like a Ponce de Leon result where we had a reversal of aging. And what that teaches us is that if we understand the basis of even aging, that we can control it, that we have an opportunity to manipulate it, and that tissues, even those that are very, very aged, have the capacity to renew themselves.
That means that we can get younger?
That means that we can certainly reduce age-related diseases. So one of the things why we have this dramatic increase in these diseases like cancer is because it's linked to the same pathway, the same circuit that causes aging. So if we can control that circuitry, we can reduce the incidence of cancer, Alzheimer's, heart disease, and so on. So minimally, I would say that it would be possible for us to increase the health span of individuals. Whether or not we would be able to live longer is a question that experiment that we did not answer.
And what's the importance of this achievement? What do you think that we can do with this information?
Well, basically what it teaches us is that if we can develop drugs that can impact on that circuitry that causes aging, we may be able to, in one shot, reduce age-related diseases. And in fact, we can do that today. There are drugs that we have that can reverse aging and slow it down.
That's quite amazing, right?
It's called exercise, it's called not overeating, and it's called not smoking. So if you do those three things, if you exercise at least 15 minutes a day, if you don't eat to excess and you eat things like vegetables and fish, the typical Portuguese diet, caldeirado, and if you do not smoke, which is very important,
you can get younger.
Then you will not have the damage that I spoke of earlier. When you smoke, you accelerate aging. It causes damage in your DNA that causes aging, causes you to look more aged, and it also causes you to have those diseases of aging.
You are president of an institution which employs more than 18,000 people. Do you still have time for research?
Yes, I do believe that it's important for all executives to be on the ground. In fact, our physician-in-chief, Tom Burke, sees patients. He operates on patients. He's a surgeon. It's very important for me to be connected with the trainees, to educate them, to be connected with my laboratory, to understand how is it that we can improve our ability to conduct research. So while I don't have as much time as I used to because I have so many other responsibilities, I devote a certain amount of my time each day to running my laboratory.
So it's about organization and...
Yes, I'm very compulsive about making sure that I use all of my time as effectively as possible. I have my family time. I try to take care of myself and exercise each day. But I also organize my professional life in a way that allows me to take care of all of the different responsibilities that I have.
Very recently, the Portuguese Minister of Foreign Affairs, Paulo Portas, visited this center. What was the purpose of this visit?
Well, I think that it's a matter of just establishing very good communication. First of all, I think there's a tremendous sense of pride that we both have in being Portuguese. I think we wanted to get to know each other better. But also, it was an opportunity for me to express to him that we stand ready to help Portugal and other nations around the world. MD Anderson is the greatest institution in the history of the world for cancer care and cancer science. we have a responsibility not just to Texas or to the United States. Our mission is to eradicate cancer for the world, and it would be a tremendous source of pride for me to be able to help in any way my people, Portugal.
Do you receive many patients for all over the world, correct?
We've received patients from all over the world. We are the world's cancer center.
Were there any discussion about future partnerships between this center and Portuguese institutions?
That discussion did come up. I think this is certainly one of the main focuses of that conversation. I think the question at this point is how can we do that most effectively on the clinical levels, on the scientific levels, and so on. We do this with many nations around the world. In fact, I returned from Oslo just a few weeks ago, where our global academic program hosted physicians and investigators from around the world. We have 26 institutions that are our sister institutions. There were 450 attendees at that meeting. It was the United Nations Against Cancer.
Let's leave research behind and talk about sports. I know that the sports have a very, very special role in your life. When did you get interested in Taekwondo?
Well, when I was in high school, I wanted to do something that was not just exercise, but something that also, was developed my mind as well. And in thinking about the different opportunities, it seemed natural that martial arts,
which
is or dancing or any of those elements where it combines both the mental and physical abilities, was something that I sought. And martial arts specifically has been around for 3,000 years because it does something very positive and special to people. It imbues them with a philosophy of respect, courtesy, humility, courage, discipline. All of those things are things that have really shaped my life. It's not just a matter of doing more push-ups or more kicks or more punches. It's much more than that. It's a way of life. It's a way of life in which you learn how to be respectful to other people. You learn how to control your emotions in a way that is positive. It's a wonderful thing that has taught me a great deal. I was very fortunate to be trained in martial arts and to be trained by such a gifted martial arts teacher.
And you were the captain of the U.S. team which won the World Championship in 1976, is that correct?
Well, the school that I was at dominated competition in the United States throughout the 1970s, so we were surrounded by some pretty extraordinary people. And this school participated in the World Championships, which that year was held in the United States. And we had 3 people representing the United States, and we did very well. And so that was something that was, obviously to be very proud of. But I was clearly the weakest person on the team.
But the captain. What about your father? How he reacted to these sports? I mean, usually Portuguese are connected with soccer.
Yes.
So
well, to this day, I remember when I was 5 years old. I'll tell you one little story that my father took me to Randall's Island to see an exhibition sport with the Santos playing, and I believe they were playing Germany that day. And and even as a 5-year-old child, way up in the stands, I could see this man that seemed to be like a man amongst children. And I asked my father, I said, "Daddy, who's that man there?" He goes, "Son, that man there is Pele."
So you had the chance to see Pele.
And I had the chance to see Pele. And even as a 5-year-old, I could recognize that he was different from everybody else. And that day, I remember, he did 3 corner kicks, and no one touched the ball, and all of them curved into the net with no one touching it. 3 times. And so it was Pele 3, Germany nothing. So that was, so I grew up in that household. Of course, in the United States, you think about baseball and
you are a great
basketball
fan of Yankees,
and the Yankees and so on. And I grew up in New York, so of course I went to the Yankees, and Mickey Mantle was, my hero growing up. So that was the culture that I grew up in. And I was very fortunate, ultimately to get into martial arts, which really taught me a lot more than traditional sports did.
And this sport is also very special because you met your wife
Yes.
through the Taekwondo.
Correct. When I was in medical school at Albert Einstein, I started a school, martial arts school, that is still in existence today. And it has taught several thousand folks by now, more than 100 black belts over the years have been trained. And one of those young students, when I was already more advanced in my career and continuing to teach, turned out to be the love of my life, Dr. Linda Chin. And she joined. She was very, very good. She was very athletic. And she ultimately became a second-degree black belt, which is fairly high ranking. She worked very hard.
You have a huge list of accomplishments. Do you feel the need for a Nobel Prize?
The Nobel Prize is certainly something I will never receive, first and foremost. If I've achieved anything in life, honestly, it's because I've been surrounded by amazing people. I've been very, very fortunate. To this day, I cannot understand why I've been so fortunate. I do not feel like I'm anything special, and I say that with great sincerity. It's always a surprise to me when I receive whatever recognition I've received.
Yeah, but many people speak about the possibility of you receive this kind of award.
Well, I was just elected to the National Academy of Sciences. To me, that is an accomplishment that if you had asked me 10 years ago, would I ever achieve that, I would have thought that you were crazy. So I feel just extremely fortunate that the son of a Portuguese immigrant could possibly rise to the level of being president of MD Anderson. This to me is by far the greatest achievement of my life.
Now in Portuguese, muito obrigado.
Muito obrigado.
E obrigado a si por ter acompanhado mais um programa com luso-americano. Sucesso!
Vai a Portugal e precisa de carro? A Portugal Auto Rentals é a sua solução. Visite-nos e faça a sua reserva através da nossa página na internet www.portugal-auto-rentals.com.
Lusitânia Savings Bank. O nosso banco. Há mais de 30 anos a servir a comunidade portuguesa.
Este é o nosso banco.
Lusitânia Savings Bank.
Há 30 anos a dar forma a Washington, D.C. Tavares Concrete, a escolha de quem quer rigor e eficácia na construção.